Hey guys, welcome back. It's me, Sal Mahajan, and in today's video, we're going to be taking a look into the complete basics of Amazon S3. So this video is a pretty long video. It consists of all of the basics and fundamental concepts that you need to know about Amazon S3. Once you do know these fundamental concepts, it will help you to dive into more deeper and advanced concepts of Amazon S3. Now, as this is a pretty long video, I have created chapters of these videos. You can find that in the chapter section or also in the description box down below. So I hope you guys do like this video, and let's start this video with the overview of Amazon S3.
And in today's video, we're going to be having a basic overview on the S3 service that is provided by AWS. So let's dive right into this video. So the first question is, what is S3? S3 basically stands for Simple Storage Service. It is an object store which is scalable and very simple to use. Now we will come over what is basically an object store, and from a scalability point of view is you can store how much of data you want to store in S3 in an S3 bucket, and it is very simple to use. That is very easy to use. Moving on, now we spoke about that S3 bucket is an object based storage. So what does an object based storage basically mean? An object based storage basically means that you can upload any file type that you can think of. Maybe you have an .exe, maybe you have an .doc, maybe you have a .ttf, which is basically your formats for your fonts, or maybe you have a .pdf, or maybe any extension. Basically any file type that you can think of can be uploaded to an S3 bucket. But an S3 bucket cannot be used for running an operating system or a database. You may think that, okay, maybe I can upload a .db file, or maybe I can upload a OVA file, an image file, or maybe an ISO file, and maybe I can run an OS or a database on S3 bucket. No, you cannot run an operating system or database on an S3 bucket. But you can use an S3 bucket to host static websites. Now, what do we mean by static websites? These are basically plain and old HTML and CSS pages wherein your data is static. That is, your data does not change dynamically. It remains the same for any and all users that visit your website. Moving on, we're going to talk about a few features about an S3 bucket. So an S3 bucket basically has unlimited storage, which basically means you can store as much data as you want to in an S3 bucket, or in the S3 service that AWS does provide. There is no limit at all. You can store as much data as you can think of. Now, an object can be up to 5 TB in size. So basically, you guys now know what an object is. An object is basically any file type that you think of. So the file type, the max size of the file type that you can upload to an S3 bucket is basically 5 terabyte, which is very huge. And I'm sure that you have never come across such a huge object size or file size. And S3 bucket is basically similar to folder. So S3 basically stores your data in a directory or folder type structure. So if you guys work with Windows, Linux, or anything like that, the way how you guys store files in different folders or different directories, it's the same way how these objects are stored in an S3 bucket. And a very important thing to remember is that S3 buckets have a universal namespace, which basically means all bucket names on the AWS platform must be unique. This does not care about your region, so nothing is region specific. Everything is global, that is universal when it comes to namespaces, that is bucket names. So for example, if you want to create a bucket name that is basically test bucket, I am very sure that test bucket is already owned by someone else. So basically, maybe if you take a test bucket like maybe 1, 1, 2, 2, 3, 3, 4, 4, this may be available. But again, once a name has been a bucket has been created with a name, it is created and no one else will be able to create a bucket with that name. So all bucket names are unique globally across the whole AWS platform. Now moving on, so the S3 bucket basically works on a key value store basis concept wherein your key is basically your name, that is your object name, or we can say your file name. Your value is basically your data or the object. So in this scenario, let's take example, I'm uploading a picture. So this a picture can basically be, let's take it is named pic.png. So this is the file that I'm uploading. So my name in this scenario would basically be pic.png, and the data would basically be this file stored over here. And what's your version ID? So whenever you upload any object to an S3 bucket, a version ID is assigned to it, assuming that versioning is enabled. Now we will dive into depth what is versioning and all, but just for the sake right now, there is some ID, a version ID that is assigned to this specific object. And then you have metadata. Metadata is basically data related to the data that you are uploading, or in more easy terms, data related to the object that you are uploading. For example, an example of metadata would be is like the size of the file. Maybe the size of the file is only 23 KB. So a metadata would basically be 23 KB. And let's move on. So S3 is basically a safe storage space. And how is it safe? Because data is spread across multiple devices and data centers to ensure availability and durability of data. So basically, again, if you are uploading a picture, for example, I'm uploading pic.png in this scenario. This file or this object will be spread across multiple different devices. Devices relates to your could be related to racks or could be related to the physical machines wherein this file or object is basically stored, and across multiple data centers. So normally if you choose S3 standard, which is the standard wherein you upload data, it is sent across three different availability zones. Of course, we will come into that. What is that? What does that basically mean? And your data, so basically you have a high availability and high durability of data. Now coming on, as I just told you guys about S3 standard. So S3 buckets basically have different tiers or different storage classes, I would say. And one of them is S3 standard, which is the default storage class that you have. And this basically provides you high availability and durability of your data. And as I mentioned, data is stored across multiple availability zones. That is basically three availability zones. So example, if one data center does go down in an availability zone, it will still, your data is still safe and will still be available. You have a 99.99% availability, and you have 11 nines of durability, which is quite high. S3 standard is basically designed for frequent access of your data. For example, you want to access your data or your object couple of times a day or maybe couple of times a week. So in that scenario, you would be using the storage class of S3 standard, as that is the best when it comes to other storage classes. And of course, we will also discuss the other storage classes that are provided by S3 and do a good comparison. And finally, some use cases. Let's go over of an S3 standard. If you want to host static websites, again, the reason why static websites comes into an S3 standard storage class is because your static website can be viewed multiple times a day, right? Could be maybe multiple times a week or maybe multiple times a day. So having those files, those HTML files, those CSS files in S3 standard will allow you to host static websites. It is also used for content distribution and also for big data analytics. Moving on, let's talk about the security features that we have in in S3. You have basically server-side encryption. So basically, any object that you are storing on AWS is basically all encrypted on the server side. So in the scenario that someone breaks into an AWS center and tries to steal the physical devices or physical hard drives wherein your data is stored, it is pretty impossible for that person to crack it because there is encryption that takes place. Now again, it is nearly impossible for anyone, or it's a very very rare scenario wherein anyone would break into an AWS data center. Second is we have is access control lists. We also call this as ACLs. So basically these are you can specify access to specific objects in your bucket, or maybe to all the objects in your bucket. And then we have bucket policies. Bucket policies, again, these are JSON based documents. If you guys have looked at my previous videos, you guys do know what are JSON documents. So bucket policies basically apply to the whole bucket as a whole. So for example, if you've created a bucket wherein you want to host a static website. Now if your bucket is private, you will not be able to host a static website because no one will be able to access those specified HTML pages, right? So in that scenario, you have to create your whole bucket. You have to create your bucket as a public bucket wherein all of your objects are basically public. So in that scenario, we will be creating a bucket policy which will make all the objects in our bucket public. Now moving on, we're gonna end with S3 follows the principle of strong read after write consistency. What this basically means is, as soon as you write an object to an S3 bucket, or maybe you're updating an object to an S3 bucket, the latest version is immediately available. So again we can take an example wherein you're uploading multiple versions of a specific object. So whenever you upload a new version of an object, you are guaranteed to get that new object as a return when you read. You will not get the previous object in this scenario. So that's the principle of strong read after write consistency. So that's about it for this video. So I hope you guys got a good overview related to an S3 bucket, what an S3 bucket is, what are objects, what are the different features, characteristics of an S3 bucket, security, what's S3 standard, what's the principle that S3 buckets follow.
And in today's video, we're going to be going over the S3 bucket. So in the previous video, you guys got an overview related to S3 and the different features and functionalities of S3. So now we're going to basically dive into the console and we're going to create an S3 bucket so you guys can get a good idea. So you can log into your AWS console. You'll be over in the dashboard. Again, S3 is available for me over here and recently visited. It may not be available for you guys, so you can just search S3 up and you can open up and the S3 dashboard or the S3 console. So let's let it load. And as you can see, I don't have any buckets created, hence why you will get this page. If you do not get this page, that basically means that some bucket has been created. So we're gonna go on to the right hand side and we can see a button that says create bucket. We're gonna click on that. And now we have all the configurations that we basically need to choose. So now basically we are gonna come to a region. Again, you guys can choose any region you want to. I'm basically gonna stick with US East 1 for most of this tutorial. My bucket type is going to be general purpose bucket. Again, directory, this is a new type of bucket that has been launched, but we won't step into that as of right now. We're only going to step in with general purpose. Now we're going to give a bucket name. So as I told you guys in the previous video, your bucket name has to be completely unique or across the whole AWS platform, no matter what region you are basically at. So let me just go ahead and maybe give Sahil YouTube. Hopefully that is selected. We're going to leave this copy settings from existing bucket. We're not going to do anything over there. Coming to object ownerships, again, this is about the ACLs that we discussed, that is called access control lists. Again, it is always recommended to keep it disabled. In the future, of course, you can enable it, but we will keep it disabled for now. Block public access, again, we don't want any
public access to this bucket, hence why we're leaving it enabled. Again, we're just basically going to stick with the default settings. We're not going to touch anything. We're going to dive in deep with each of these things. But yeah, bucket versioning, again, you guys maybe remember my previous video I said about version ID. So version ID is related to bucket versioning over here. Initially, we're going to keep it disabled. Our default encryption, as I said, that AWS supports server-side encryption. Again, you have multiple options wherein you want S3 to manage the keys, or you want to manage the keys through AWS KMS, which is basically key management service. Again, we're going to keep this to the default. Our bucket key is going to be enabled. If we come to advanced settings, we only have one setting available, which basically is object lock, and we're going to keep that as disabled. Again, we will go over all of these details in all of these things in detail, but yeah, basically I have left every single thing as default. The only thing that I have done is basically given a name. Now hopefully if this name is available, we should be able to create a bucket. So let's click on create bucket, and it says that bucket name must not contain uppercase characters. So you guys can see you cannot have uppercase characters. So let me do Sahil dash YouTube, and let's go down and click on create bucket. And yeah, here you go. Sahil dash YouTube bucket has been created, which basically means that no one has used this specified bucket name. And this is going to be your S3 console whenever you have buckets created. As you can see, it says Sahil YouTube, the region, bucket and objects are not public, and your creation date. Now let's head into our S3 bucket so I can show you guys how an S3 bucket looks like. So this is where you will be able to view all of your objects or directories. So let's go over each one of these subheadings that we over here. So the first subheading, that is objects, is basically where you can view all of your directories and your objects. You have various different actions that you can perform on this specified tab, and you can create a folder. As I said, you can create directories. S3 bucket works on folders or directory basis, so you can create a folder and a folder and a folder and so on, just how you do on your Windows laptop or maybe a Linux laptop if you guys use that. And this is your upload option. Here basically you can drag and drop the files that you want to upload and stuff like that. You can add files, you can add a complete folder. You can see the destination, and you can specify a few permissions and properties. Now moving on, we're going to head over to the properties tab. Now when you come over to the properties tab, you'll be able to get a bucket overview. Again, basically what's your region, what is your ARN. ARN stands for Amazon Resource Name. Again, this is quite important because when you guys will be creating policies, or when you guys will be working with cloud formation scripts, when you will be writing scripts, that is where ARNs are quite important. And again, you can see your creation date. You can see bucket versioning is disabled. There are no tags that we have provided, and you can see our encryption related stuff. And then you have something called intelligent tiering configurations. Of course, we will go over what is intelligent tiering, but you can view that over here. You have server access login, cloud trail data events, event notifications. Event notifications, basically if any if any specified event takes place on your S3 bucket, you can basically get notified to it. You have Amazon Event Bridge, transfer acceleration, object lock, static website hosting. Again, this is something that we discussed, wherein you can host static websites in an S3 bucket. We will of course go over how can you host a static website. Coming over to permissions. Again, you can see that the bucket and objects are not public. If you hover over this, you should get some more information related to the same. So block all public access is basically on, and here is wherein basically you put your bucket policy. Now again, bucket policies are bucket level, that is they apply to every object or bucket wide, and ACLs are only applied to specified objects. Then you have your object ownership, you have your ACLs as we just spoke. And coming back up, we can go to metrics. Again, metrics, there shouldn't be anything, but yeah, you can basically view various different metrics that you have over here. You can go to management. Inside management, you have lifecycle rules. Again, we will be discussing what are lifecycle rules, so you guys will get a better understanding. Then we have replication rules. So if you guys watch my IAM video wherein I showed you guys a custom policy that I created, which was basically SRR, which is same region replication. That is something what is related to replication rules over here. And then you have inventory configurations. And finally, the last tab that we have is access points. Again, if you want to create any access points, you can create access points over here. So this is basically a very short overview related to how can you create an S3 bucket with the default settings, and an overview related to all of the tabs that you have when once a bucket is created. Again, make sure that your bucket name is unique. That is, it's basically unique globally. So and again, if you guys want to delete this bucket, you can go back to your buckets tab. You can select your bucket, and you will not be able to delete your bucket if you have objects present in your bucket. So in that scenario, what you can do is you can click on empty, and it will empty your bucket. Once your bucket is completely empty, then you can head over to delete and delete your bucket. If your bucket does have any objects present and you click on delete, it will basically say unable to delete objects because sorry, unable to delete your bucket because objects are present. So always make sure that your bucket is completely empty before you delete your bucket. So that's about it for this video. I hope you guys got a good overview related to S3, a demo related to S3.
In today's video, we'll be discussing about S3 objects. Basically, what are the different properties that S3 provides you, how to upload an object, and how to delete an object. So if you guys watched my previous video, you guys would have known how to create an S3 bucket and what are the various different tabs available. So as you guys can see in the last video, we created an S3 bucket that was Sahil YouTube. So I'm just going to click onto that. If you guys do not have any bucket created, you can watch my previous video on how to create a bucket. And if you guys already have a bucket created in your AWS S3 console, you can head over to your bucket. So what we're going to do is we're going to head into this bucket that is Sahil YouTube. And once you guys are here in your specified bucket, like mine is Sahil YouTube, we're going to click on this button that says upload. When we click on this button that says upload, you will get the upload window available. You can see that it says that if you want to upload a file larger than 160 GB, use the AWS CLI, SDK, or Amazon S3 REST API, because those are more efficient ways to upload a file that is larger than 160 GB. So as you can see, it says drag and drop your files over here. So if you guys want to drag and drop, you can do that, or you want to add them, you can add them. I'm going to go ahead and click on add files. I know that I have created a directory over here which has all my which is basically a test file. It's empty. So here you go. You can see that the file is available. You can see the destination, that is your bucket name, any destination details, permissions, and properties. So we will head over and click on upload. You can see that we get a green box that says upload successful. Good. And you can also see in the status over here that it says that this object has succeeded being uploaded. So we're going to go ahead and click on close. And that's it. There you go. That it's as simple as that on how to upload an object to the S3 bucket. Now we can see a few properties over here related to to the object, like the name of the file. It was a txt file, hence why we can see .txt. It shows you the type. It shows you the last modified. When was this file last modified according to your UTC? It shows the size. Again, this was an empty file. There wasn't anything inside the file. It was a blank file, hence why it is showing 0 bytes. And your storage class is standard because we didn't touch anything over there. So we can click on this object and we get more properties over here. You can see who's the owner, what's the region that it where your object is stored in, your last modified size, your type, txt, your key. Your key is quite important, so that's one thing you can look out to. Your S3 URI is also sometimes quite important. Your ARN is also important. Your basically Amazon resource name.
your entity tag and your object URL. So if you want to access this specified object from a public URL, then you would be heading over to this URL, assuming that you have given the correct permissions so that the public can access this specified object. Now coming down, you can see we have the section that says Object Management Overview. The following bucket properties and object management configurations impact the behavior of this object. So as you can see, bucket versioning was disabled when we did create this bucket, hence why it's showing disabled. Object lock was also disabled, retention period, all of these things were disabled when we did create our S3 bucket. And we do not have any replication. Again, we'll get into what replication basically is, but we do not have any replication rules set, hence why this all is empty. You can come down and you can see the various different store. You can see the storage class it is stored in, if it's server-side encryption or whatever you guys have chosen, your additional checksums and your tags and your metadata and your object log once again. So these are different properties that you can view. You can head over to the permissions tab, which shows your ACLs, that is your access control lists basically, and finally versions. Now you can see there isn't going to be anything over here because versioning is disabled in this specified bucket. But if you have versioning enabled and you're uploading multiple versions of the same file or the same object, you will be able to see all the different versions over here. So this is basically the different properties that you have related to an object when you upload it. You can copy the S3 URI. Again, as I told you guys, that is something that's quite important, hence why we have a copy button right here. You can download this object too in case maybe you were taking a backup and you lost everything and you want to get that specified object or file back. You can go ahead and download it. You can open it. This open relates to that public URL that I showed you guys, and you have various different object actions that you can take. You can share with a pre-signed URL, you can find the total size, you can copy it, you can move it, you can run a query, you can edit, rename the object and edit all of these various different properties or actions. So that's basically how you upload an object, what are the various different properties and what actions can be performed on a specified object. Now let's head back to our bucket. Now let's take that we want to delete this object. How do we delete it? Pretty simple. You go ahead, you select the object that is in question or the one that you want to delete. You can see the delete button auto populates is enabled. You can go ahead and click on delete and it will basically tell you show you the specified objects that you're going to be deleting, and it will ask you to confirm deletion, type permanently delete in the input field. So permanently delete. There you go. Yep, the spelling is correct in the first try. Of course, if your spelling is wrong or you miss a space or something like that, this delete objects button will not get highlighted. So anyways, we did write the correct spelling, so we can click on delete object and there you go. Your object has been deleted. Now again, if you do have versioning enabled, your object will be marked for deletion. It will not be deleted. That means you can retrieve it back. But yeah, that's again for another video. So that's about it for this video, guys. You guys got to know how to upload an object, what are the different properties related to an object, what are the actions that you can perform on an object, and also how to delete an object. And in today's video, we're going to be discussing about static websites. How can you host a static website on Amazon S3? So in the previous videos, we saw about S3, what is S3, how to upload objects to S3, what are the different properties S3 has. So today we're going to work on one of those fun properties, that is hosting a static website. So let's dive right into this. So you're going to head over to your console. In your console, you're going to head over to S3, as I have S3 over here. When we head over to S3, we're going to create a new bucket. We're going to click on create bucket. You can choose, I'm leaving it as US East 1. I'm going to leave it as a general purpose bucket. I'm going to say this is my test bucket. I don't know, some random numbers. Okay, that's my bucket name. I'm going to leave object ownerships as ACLs disabled. And again, because we are creating a static website, and this website we want people on the internet to be able to access, right? Hence why we are going to uncheck this box that says block all public access because we do want to allow public access. Other than that, make sure you do acknowledge that the current settings that you have disabled it. Other than that, we're going to leave everything as it is, as the defaults, and we're going to go ahead and click on Create Bucket. There we go. Our bucket has been created. Let's head right into our bucket. Now, when we head into our bucket, what we're going to do is we're going to head over to the Properties tab. When we head over to the Properties tab, if we scroll all the way down, you will see an option that says Static Website Hosting. And this option is currently disabled. So we're going to quickly go ahead and click on Edit. We're going to see, click on Enable, and we see various different options that pop up. So what's our hosting type? Are we hosting a static website or redirect request for an object? Of course, we are hosting a static website, hence why we're going to select that option. Your index document. Now, because we're hosting a static website, we need to provide some index that is basically our home page and an error document, which is optional. Again, these will be HTML pages, and the reason why they are HTML pages is because we're creating a static website that the content does not change, so it is not dynamic. So normally people name their home pages and the initial page of their website as index.html, so we're going to do the same thing. Again, you can have an error document. Now the purpose of this error document is that if someone goes to a specified path on your website and you don't have any document or any HTML file related to that, then this error page will pop up. So I do have an error page available, so I'm just going to type in error.html. Again, this is completely optional, so you don't have to worry about it if you leave it empty too. We don't have any redirection rules, and I'm going to go ahead and click on Save Changes. Wonderful. You can see that we have edited. So if you scroll all the way back down, you'll be able to see that our static website is now enabled. We're choosing our hosting as bucket hosting, and you can see this is the public URL that we have received for our specified bucket. Now, of course, if we go to this URL, we won't be able to see anything because we have not uploaded those two files, that is the index.html and the error.html. So let's head back to the objects page. And now what we're going to do is we have to upload two files over here. I'm going to go ahead and click on upload. And I'm going to drag and drop those files. I have them available over here. So the two files that I am uploading over here are basically standard HTML pages. There's nothing great over there. Again, you guys, if you guys know HTML, that's pretty there. Again, I will also put the code for these files in the description so you guys can pick it up from there if required. So again, we're not going to touch any of the settings. We can see that these two files have been found by S3. We're going to click on upload, and you can see that here you go, upload has been successful. Let's go ahead and close the files. Now, still we will not be able to view these files if we go. So let's try it out. Okay, let's click on this URL. That's our public website, and when this page opens, you will see a 403 forbidden, that is access denied. And the reason why access is still denied, even though we have enabled bucket settings, we have enabled static hosting, we have also uploaded the required files. The reason why this is still, disabled is because we need to add some bucket policies. Until we do not add those specified bucket policies, we will always get this access denied. So head back to your S3 console. We're going to scroll all the way back up. We're going to head to the permissions tab now. Now, you guys, we did turn off block all public access. That is step one. Now, coming to step two, we need to add or modify our bucket policy. So we're going to go ahead and click on edit, and this is the policy page where we can edit our policy. Now I am just going to copy and paste this policy that I have. I will also put this policy in the description box so you guys can pick it up from there, but I would recommend that you guys type this policy out. I will of course explain you what this policy is, but I recommend you guys to type this policy out. So this is basically a JSON format, the policies in JSON format, and you can see there are very different key value pairs over here. The first that you can see is version. This version is basically the policy version. It is stated by AWS, so there's no, no brainer or anything over here. Whatever AWS, the current policy version is going on, that is stated by AWS is what you'll type in over here. Now we're creating a statement. inside a statement is where all the good stuff come. So we're saying that we have an SID that is public read get object, okay? And the effect is allow, and principal is a star. Now star basically means everything. We also call this as wildcard, and the action that we have over here is S3 colon get object on a resource of the specified bucket. Now you can see we have bucket name over here. This is where we are going to put in our bucket's ARN. Now what is an ARN? If you guys have watched my previous video, you guys will know ARN relates to Amazon resource name. So I'm going to go ahead and click on copy bucket ARN, and I am just going to paste it right over here. And we do need the slash star because it is, again, we want to do it for all of the objects that are present in our bucket. So basically we're saying that allow public read access for all the objects present in this specified bucket. Okay, allow read access or get of every single object that is specified in this bucket. That is the policy that we are setting. Now, when we go down, we can click on Save Changes. If our policy is all well and good, it'll be like successfully edited bucket policy, and there you go. Now, let's head back to our properties. In fact, let's go back to this tab. And now, when we refresh our page, you can see that it says, Welcome to my static website hosted on AWS S3. And there you go, guys. You have successfully set up a static website on AWS. Now, if you guys didn't mention, I told you, right? We uploaded an error file, error.html. Now, in the scenario that, your friends, you share this link with your friends and they try to go to a path that you don't have any object or any HTML file for. For example, I go to a page that says slash hello. Now in this scenario, what happens is you can see that Amazon will automatically redirect that person to your error page that says 404 error page. Again, that's what I put over there. That's why it's popping up. But again, whatever error page says, it will automatically redirect or it will display them the error page. So that is where the error page comes into play. Again, Amazon does it all on their own, so you guys don't need to worry much about it. So this is basically how you can create a static website related to on S3, and you can share that URL with your friends and family. They can view it, you can play around. Of course, you can add in CSS, HTML, and make this, of course, more friendly and stuff like that. And another good feature why, if you have a static website, that why should you host it on S3 is because you don't have to worry about load. S3 automatically will scale up your resources or and will manage the load, so you do not need to worry whether you're having 1,000 visitors on your static website or you're having a million visitors on your static website. S3 will handle that traffic or load for you. So I hope you guys did like this video. Again, let's reiterate over the different steps that you need. You have to go over to properties, you have to enable static website hosting, and you have to make sure that you put in the index file name, and if you have an error file, put in the error file name. Make sure you upload those two files, that is index.html. Again, remember, if you named your file as homepage.html, you have to upload a file that is named homepage.html. So keep that in mind. If you do not, it will not work. And the same goes with error. After that, you can come over to your permissions tab. You have to make sure that you disable block all public access, and also you add this bucket policy, which basically states allow read access to all of the objects in a specified bucket, which is this bucket. So in today's video, we're going to be talking about versioning in S3. So in the previous videos, you would have heard a lot about versioning. You would have saw the properties related to versionings and all of that. So today we're going to be talking about versioning. So what is versioning actually? So versioning is basically wherein you are creating multiple versions of a specified object. And now you may think that, what's the advantage of versioning? Like, why do we need versioning? So there are quite a lot of advantages of versioning. The best advantage of versioning, I would say, is that if you by mistake delete an object, The object does not get permanently deleted if you have versioning enabled. It marks the object for deletion, which basically means you can still retrieve that specified object. And another use case would be is maybe you're uploading multiple versions of a specified file, and then maybe you need to retrieve a version of a file that you uploaded a month back. Now maybe in your local hard drive that file is not available, but that version will be available in S3 bucket. So these are a few, different advantages of versioning that we have over here. So let's dive right into this AWS console and let me show you guys how can you enable versioning and how can you view the different versions of your object. So you can see I'm over here in the S3 console. I'm going to head directly and click on create bucket. We're going to create a new bucket. Again, region, I'm leaving it as US East 1. Bucket type will be general purpose. My bucket name, again, test bucket, some random numbers, and we don't want to copy any settings. We're going to leave ACLs as disabled. We're going to block all public access. And now this is the part where we have to look into, that is bucket versioning. Again, you can see Amazon says versioning is a means of keeping multiple variants of an object in the same bucket. So we're going to enable this, and do remember that once you enable bucket versioning, you cannot disable it. You can suspend bucket versioning, but you cannot disable bucket versioning. So do be cautious about that. And we're going to leave everything else as a default, and we're going to go ahead and click on create bucket. There you go, our bucket has been successfully created. So we created test bucket, some numbers. So you can see we have 0 objects. Now we're going to head over to the properties tab, and when you come down, or when you see over here, you can see that bucket versioning is enabled. Again, another one more advantage I would like to tell you guys of bucket versioning is you can add multi-factor authentication delete, which basically means that you uploaded some very critical file and you don't want the file to be deleted by mistake. You can enable MFA, that's multi-factor authentication. That is a second step that is required before a file is being deleted. So that's another good advantage that you have related to bucket versioning. Now let me show you guys bucket versioning in action. So let's head over back to our objects tab and let's upload an object. So I have a test file over here. We have been using the same test file. So I'm going to go ahead and upload this test file. You can see test.txt. Again, it's 0 bytes because we don't have anything in that file. It's a blank empty file. We're going to go ahead and click upload. You can see upload successful. Let's close this tab and you can see, there you go. We have a object in our bucket. Let's go ahead and view the properties of this object. As you can see, the various different properties are there, and then you can see the third tab that says versions. We're going to go to that tab, and here is where you will be able to view the various different versions of your object. Now you can see every version will have a version ID, and also another good thing is that it will always tell you which is the current version that is available. You get other details like what's the type, when was it last modified, the size, and of course the storage class. As you can see, this file was last modified on March 6th, 2024 at 2048:08. Okay, wonderful. Now what we're going to do is we're going to head back to our bucket and we're going to upload the same object once again. So we're going to go back. I'm going to drag and drop the file over here. We can see it's the same file, test.txt. It's the same blank file. We're going to click upload. That was successful, and let's close. Now you can see we only have one object, and that is because we have bucket versioning enabled. Now let's head over to this object, back to the versions tab, and now you guys will be able to see that we are having 2 version IDs over here. And the reason behind that is because we uploaded this file twice, or you can say we uploaded 2 different versions of the same object. And as you can see from the time difference, the last one was 2045 and the current one is 2046. And as I told you guys, Amazon does indicate which version is the latest or the current version. So this is basically bucket versioning, how you can enable bucket versioning, how you can upload objects and everything. Now let's take the scenario wherein you created a bucket and you did disable what do you say bucket versioning. No need to worry. You just go to the properties tab. You can see this edit button over there. Click on that edit button and click on enable, and you will be able to enable bucket versioning. As I told you guys again, the moment you enable bucket versioning, you will not be able to disable it. You will only be able to suspend it. As you can see over here, when I am trying to edit the bucket versioning um, for a bucket that has versioning enabled, it says you can either suspend it or enable it. And if you read the definition over here for suspend, this basically says this this suspends the creation of object versions for all operations but preserves any existing object versions, which basically means if you try to upload new objects, it will not create versions for those new objects that are uploaded or any operations that take place on them. But any objects that were uploaded prior to this suspension, it will still retain those versions. So I'm going to go ahead and click cancel because I don't want to change anything. So that's about it about bucket versioning. I hope you guys did get an understanding on what bucket versioning is, how can you enable it, that you're unable to disable it, you can only suspend it, how to view the different versions, what's the current version, and what are the different advantages of bucket versioning. And in today's video, we're going to be talking about Amazon S3 storage classes. So in the previous video, we discussed about S3 objects, how can you upload hosting static websites and all of those good stuff. And today we're going to be talking about the various different storage classes that S3 provides you with. Again, we are going to be referring to the S3 documentation that we have by AWS. This is the best documentation that is out there, and you guys should make a habit to always read and check the documentation whenever you have any doubts or want to get any questions resolved. So let's dive right into Amazon S3 storage classes. So what is actually the purpose of the storage of these storage classes? So you may have various different use cases for your data, and for those specified use cases, we have these different storage classes. So on the left hand side, you can basically see the different storage classes that we have. That is S3 standard, intelligent tiering, express one zone, standard IA, one zone IA, glacier instant retrieval, and glacier flexible retrieval. And finally, the last one is S3 glacier deep archive. So now, as you guys can see, the various different S3 storage classes that we have, let's dive into each one of them. So firstly, we have the Amazon S3 standard. Now, you guys would have seen the standard in a lot of previous different demo videos that I have uploaded. This is basically a general purpose storage class that is provided to you. It provides you high durability, availability, and performance. And this is basically used for, it has a wide variety of use cases, like maybe you want to use it for your cloud applications, dynamic websites, content distribution. For example, maybe you have uploaded a few files that people download from time to time, that is on a daily basis or maybe every other day. So that could be a small example. So a few key features of this S3 standard is it's a general purpose storage for frequently accessed data. It has low latency and high throughput performance, and it is designed to deliver 99.99% availability with an availability SLA of 99.9. So again, you can take this storage class as a general purpose storage, and yep. Second is we have something that's called unknown or change in access. And over here we have the Amazon S3 intelligent tiering. This is quite interesting and unique, to be honest. Um, the use case of this specified storage class is when you cannot predict your access. Maybe this week your objects are being accessed on a daily basis, and maybe the next week it's only being accessed once a week, and maybe after that even less than that. So your access is the access to your objects is unknown, or it's changing, and you're not quite sure. Maybe this month it's quite high, the next month is quite low. So this is where intelligent tiering comes into place. So you can see intelligent herein is a first cloud storage that automatically reduces your storage costs on a granular object level by automatically moving data to the most cost effective access tier based on access frequency. So again, you can see the best part of this is granular object level, that this happens on each object. So for example, if you have 5 objects in your bucket and 2 of them are being accessed on a daily basis, it would keep that object in an S3 standard class. But maybe let's take your other 3 objects that are remaining. They are not at all being accessed. It may move it to standard IA, or it may move it down to Glacier Instant Retrieval or Flexible Retrieval, or maybe even Deep Archive, according to the settings that you have put. A few, what do you say, use cases we could say is normally used for data lakes or data analytics, or maybe user generated content. So this is pretty unique, to be honest. You will only find this on AWS. You will not find this type of storage class on any other cloud provider, for example, Microsoft Azure or Google Cloud. A few key features that you can automatically save costs for data with unknown changing access patterns. You're designed to deliver a 99.9% availability, and yeah, you have no operational overhead and stuff like that. So yep. Now let's move to another category that is called high performance. Over here we have Amazon S3 Express One Zone. So if you guys know about what you say S3 storage classes, you may have not heard about this one because this is something that is quite new. It is What does basically one zone mean? So normally whenever you create a bucket, um, uh, uh, your objects that you upload in the bucket are stored in 3 different availability zones. And the reason that is done is to increase your availability. In case one zone goes down, you will still have access to your data because it is still available in 2 different zones. So one zone basically means that it is storing your data in one single zone instead of 3 availability zones. So over there you see, instead of storing your maybe 1 terabyte object into 3 different, you're only storing it into one. So automatically your costs are going to reduce. And the reason why this is express is because it provides you speed. It increases your access speed by 10 times. And again, as I mentioned, because you're storing your data in only one zone, your costs reduced by 50% compared to the standard S3, which basically stores your data or your objects in 3 different availability zones. And normally people use this for analytics and ML workloads, as you can see over here. And the best part is you can scale to handle millions of requests per minute. So that's pretty awesome. Now let's move more towards the infrequent access. This is wherein you're not accessing your data or the objects in your bucket quite often. So the first we have is S3, standard infrequent access. So let's go right off with what AWS says. AWS says that S3 standard IA is for data that is accessed less frequently, but but requires rapid access when needed. So for example, you may have a few files wherein you aren't there may be required, I would say maybe once a week or once every other week or maybe even once a month. So in that scenario, you can store those objects in this standard S3 standard IA, and you only store those buckets here which those objects here which require rapid access when needed. Another small use case could be is maybe medical documents. You can store your medical documents in standard infrequent access. Now you may not know, you may need your medical documents maybe this month, the next month, maybe after 3 months, 6 months, or something like that. But when you need it, you require instant or rapid access to those medical documents. So that's one use case that we have over here. So you can see a few key features is infrequently accessed data that needs millisecond access. We call it our rapid access, and it provides you the same low latency and high throughput performance of S3 standard. Again, that relates to our rapid access or our rapid access. Now moving on to the next infrequent access category we have is Amazon S3 one zone infrequent access. Now this is exactly the same as your S3 infrequent access. The only difference is that, as I told you guys, S3 normally stores data in a minimum of three availability zones, but in this one S3 one zone infrequent access, it stores your data only in one specific zone, hence reducing your cost per GB stored. And in return, it will also reduce your cost for retrieval. So as you can see, your it has the same features and everything. Everything is exactly the same. The only difference is your data is only stored in a single availability zone. So in the scenario that that availability zone does go down, then you may face issues in accessing that data. Now we're coming to a different category, which is called archival. So archive. So we looked into general purpose, unknown, or unknown, changing access. We looked into infrequent access, and now finally we're coming to our last, which is our archive. As the name suggests, you're archiving data over here. So the first category that we have, or the first storage class that we have an archive, relates to Amazon S3 Glacier Instant Retrieval. Again, what we're going to do, so basically, when do you use S3 Glacier Instant Retrieval? You use this specified storage class when you have data that needs to be stored for a long time and only needs to be accessed for a few times per year. And another condition applies to that is you require access to that data immediately. That's basically where you're going to store S3. So you have three different steps. One, you know that this data needs to be stored for a couple of years. Maybe it could be compliance purposes or anything, any XYZ reason. That's one of your thing. The second thing, you know that maybe this data is could be accessed a couple of times a year. And the third is that when you require access to this data, you want to be able to retrieve it instantly. Now, if these three, it's a yes, 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 then you're gonna go for Amazon S3 Glacier Instant Retrieval. As you can see, there is a minimum object size that you have, that is 128 KB, that needs to be there, or you will be unable to upload an object to this specified storage class. Now moving on to Amazon S3 Glacier Flexible Retrieval. This is another storage class that is there, which relates to what do you say, archival. Here it's basically it's used for archive data that is accessed only one or two times per year. And you may know that you will not get instant access to this data, but it will take a couple of minutes for you to get access to this data. A couple of minutes to a couple of hours. But the specific type of data that is stored over here is that is accessed only one or two times per year. If you're accessing any archival data which is more than two times a year, then you would head back to our S3 Glacier Instant Retrieval. But if anything is accessed only one or two times a year and you do not require instant, what do you say, retrieval, then you can go with S3 Glacier Flexible Retrieval. As you can see, it's mentioned over here, your retrieval times can span anywhere from minutes to hours. Now moving on to our final and last storage class that is provided by AWS is the Amazon S3 Deep Archive. Now here data is stored which needs to be stored for 7 or 10 years or maybe even longer than that. Now what type of data is stored over here? Normally regulatory compliance data is stored over here, and That's basically the use case of this specific archival bucket. Again, we may not use this in our day-to-day life, but organizations out there for compliances, they do need to store certain data sets for 7 to 10 years or even longer. So in that scenario, this is the best, the most efficient one to store huge sums of data. And if you ever require access to this data, it can be restored within 12 hours. That is, we are able to retrieve that data within 12 hours. And this is the most cost efficient and a very low cost of storage per GB that AWS does provide. So this was an explanation related to the various different storage classes that Amazon does provide. Again, I would recommend you guys to please do go through this documentation, especially this link. I will be sharing this link in the comments and in the description. Please make sure that you do go through this. In case you guys are planning to give any certification, that is the cloud practitioner or maybe even the solution architect, going through these storage classes and understanding when to use what storage class is quite important. Also, if you plan on giving interviews related to cloud engineering roles, AWS, Azure, or anything like that, make sure that you do have a good idea related to the storage classes related according to the specific cloud provider that you are planning to work with or interview for, because this question is asked quite a lot in certifications and also interviews. And in today's video, we're going to be discussing about life cycle policies. So in the previous video, if you guys watched about the different storage classes, this is where life cycle policies will come into place. So it's basically a concept wherein you can move your objects from one storage class to another according to a few policies. For example, you have an object. That object has not been is in the S3 standard storage class, and that object is not being accessed for about 30 days. So you can set a lifecycle policy that if an object is not accessed for 30 days, you move it to standard infrequent access. And again, you can set another policy or another life cycle policy that basically states if this object that is in standard infrequent access has not been accessed for 90 days, then you can move this specified object to an archive level storage class. So basically, you are moving your objects from one storage class to another on a specific set of rules. So let's dive direct into the S3 console so I can show you guys how this is done. So let's go ahead and create a new bucket. So you can see I'm here in my S3 console and we're going to click on create bucket. I'm going to again leave everything as default. I am not making any changes to any default settings. I'm going to leave everything just as it is. I'm just going to give a random bucket name, maybe test bucket. Let's give it as a life cycle test. I don't know, test bucket, some random numbers. Okay, perfect. And I'm going to leave everything as default and go all the way down and click on create bucket. Yep, here you go. So we have our bucket over here that says lifecycle test bucket and some numbers. So here you go. This is our buckets. Now we're going to head over to the management tab because the management tab has this basically has the lifecycle rules over here. So we're going to do is we're going to click on create lifecycle rule. Let's give it a rule name. So I'm going to put it as my test rule. Uh, Choose a rule scope. You want to apply this, limit the scope of this rule using one or more filters, or you want to apply this rule to all the objects in your bucket. For this use case, we're going to put in apply to all objects in this bucket, and we're going to acknowledge that we want to do that. Now here are basically rule actions that you have. So the first is move current versions of objects between storage classes, move non-current versions of objects between storage classes, expire current versions of objects, permanently delete non-current versions of objects, delete expired object delete markers or incomplete multi-part uploads. As you can see, a lot of versions have been mentioned, which means you can also implement lifecycle rules with versioning. So what we're going to do is we're going to stick to the basics. That is, we want to move the current version of the object between different storage classes. Now we're going to come down. Now this is where we're going to put in our rules, that is transition current versions of objects between storage classes. So uh, let's take that our first rule is going to be that if an object after 30 days of creation of that object, we want to move it to standard infrequent access. And after, let's take maybe, maybe about 90 days of that, we want to move that specified object to Glacier instant retrieval. So this is our basic rule. After 30 days of object creation, we will move that to standard infrequent access. And about after 90 days of that object creation, we will move it to Glacier Instant Retrieval. Again, you can see these are the different storage classes we can move it to. You can even add more transitions. For example, um, you know maybe after your the only option that you have is to move it to flexible retrieval or to deep archive after instant retrieval. So there you go. And if you can see, this is your, you can review your transition and expiry action. So on day 0 your object was created, on day 30 your object is moved to standard infrequent access, and on day 90 your object is moved to Glacier instant retrieval. So we're going to click on create rule. There you go. Our rule has been created, my test rule. And that is about it. Now you guys can go ahead and you can upload an object. Of course, I've put the days as 30 over here. So if you guys do not want to wait for 30 days, you can just put it as a day or two as your lifecycle policy to move it from standard to standard infrequent access. Upload an object, and after 2 or 3 days, or again whatever the days that you have specified and the transition rule, you will be able to view that your object has moved from your S3 standard to S3 infrequent access, or whatever storage class you wish to move it to. So that's basically about it for lifecycle rules and configurations. And the reason why people use this is, or why organizations use this is to reduce your costs, because when you keep going down the line in the storage classes, is your cost to store this, your cost per GB actually reduces. So if you know that you have some object that hasn't been touched for the previous 90 days, there's a high probability that this object will not be touched or will not be accessed in the near future too. So you can keep moving it down the storage classes and move it maybe to an archive level, or the instant archive, Glacier instant retrieval, in the scenario that you may need instant access to that specified object. Today's video, we're going to be talking about S3 object log. So let's dive right into the video. So what is S3 object log? So basically, object log is a feature provided by AWS for the S3 platform, where it prevents objects from being deleted. It helps you to prevent objects from being deleted. And now you may ask, why do you want objects not to be deleted? So there are many compliance or regulatory requirements that are there, wherein companies have to keep objects for a certain period of time. So that could be one of the reasons why you want to prevent objects from being deleted. And now the object log basically follows the worm model. That is, you write once and read many, wherein you're only able to write an object to your S3 bucket once, and you can read that object multiple times but cannot do anything related to it. That is, you cannot delete that specified object. Moving on, we have is the object lock modes. So we basically have two different modes available in this object lock feature or functionality that AWS provides us with. The first being governance mode. In governance mode, users cannot overwrite or delete an object version or alter its lock settings unless they have the special permission. So basically, if you are a root user or you have a specified role that allows you to alter the lock policy or overwrite or delete an object, then you will be able to delete that specified object in governance mode. Now, coming to the compliance mode, in the compliance mode, once an object is protected, remember, once the object is protected, it cannot be overwritten or deleted by any user. Remember, any user, which also includes the root user of your AWS account. So even though the root user has the highest privilege across the your AWS organization or AWS account, that root user cannot delete or overwrite that specified object if you are in compliance mode. But if you are in governance mode, the root user or any user who has those special permissions can alter or delete that specified object. Moving forward, we have something that is called retention period. Now, this retention period is common for both of the object log modes that we have. It basically protects an object for a fixed amount of time, and only after the retention period expires, action can be taken. So, for example, you uploaded an object to an S3 bucket, and you set an object lock onto that and saying that you want the retention period to be 30 days. Okay, your retention period is 30 days. That means that object cannot be deleted, overwritten, or any action cannot be taken place on that specified object for a 30-day period. Once this 30-day period is completed, that is when any action can be taken on that specified object. And now this retention period is same for both of the object log modes that we have, that is the governance mode and compliance. Now, coming on to the final slide that we have over here is called Glacier Vault Lock. Now, this is for when you have objects in the Glacier related storage classes. That's where Glacier Vault Lock comes, where it basically allows you to easily deploy and enforce compliance controls for individual S3 Glacier vaults with the vault lock policy. And once that Glacier Vault is locked, the policy can no longer be changed. So, for example, if you set a vault policy saying that for 120 days, you cannot perform any action on this specified Glacier Vault, and once you lock that vault, you will not be able to do anything, even though if you are a root user, you still will not be able to perform any action for 120 days. So let's dive right into the S3 console so I guys can show you object log, where is it found in S3 and how can you guys configure it. So let's head right over to the S3 console. Okay guys, so now we're on the S3 console and you can see we are here in the general purpose buckets and I have one test bucket created over here. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and click on a create bucket. We're going to leave all the settings to default and I'm going to give some random bucket name. Maybe we can give it as object log YouTube. Hopefully this is available. Again, I am leaving every single thing as default and I'm going to go ahead and click on create bucket. Okay, there you go. Our bucket has been created. That is object log YouTube. Let's head right into our bucket. So you basically need to go over to the properties tab, and when you go over to the properties tab, you can scroll all the way down and you will see an option over here that says object log. You can see that currently it is disabled and we're going to go ahead and click on edit. Now, when you click on edit, you're going to see an error message pop up saying that object log works on version buckets. You must enable versioning on this bucket before you can enable object log. So guys, if you are planning to implement object log on your bucket, then do make sure that you enable versioning. I'm going to go ahead, click on enable versioning. There you go. Versioning has been enabled. And if you guys do remember, the moment you enable versioning, you will not be able to disable it. You can only suspend versioning. Okay, so now we're going to see that we can now go ahead and configure object log. So I'm going to go ahead and click on enable. It's going to ask you to acknowledge it. We're going to acknowledge it, and they're going to ask you a question. Do you want to have a default retention period, which basically means it automatically protects new objects put into this bucket from being deleted or overwritten. For this use case, let's say yes, we want to have a default retention period, and now we get the two retention modes that we spoke about. One is governance and one is compliance. As you can see under compliance, it's mentioned that no user can overwrite or delete protected objects during the retention period. Now, as I told you guys can choose a default retention period. And you want to be it as days or years, you can specify it. For example, I put it as 1 day, and I go ahead and click on Save Changes. And there you go. Our object lock configurations has been set. We can again scroll back down and you can see it's enabled. Our default retention is enabled, and we're going with the governance mode and 1 day, which basically means if I upload an object to this S3 bucket for 1 day, I will not be able to delete this specified object. But because I am the root user and I have admin privileges, I can override that setting and still delete that specified object. But in the scenario that some other user comes up who does not have root privilege, they will not be able to delete this object or the specified object for 1 day. Today's video, we're going to be talking about encrypting S3 objects. So let's dive right into this video. So we have basically two types of encryption. Now then, this again is not related just to AWS, but in general, in computer science or in security, we have two types of encryption. One is called encryption in transit, and the second is encryption at rest. Now, when it comes to encryption at transit, you basically have SSL, TLS, and you also have HTTPS. That is wherein your data is encrypted while it is being in transit. That is when, for example, you are uploading an object from your local computer to AWS. So while your file or your object is being transferred over the internet, it is encrypted using SSL, TLS, or HTTPS. That is called in transit when your object is moving, is in the network. Now, coming on, we have the second type, that is encryption at rest. This basically has two types wherein you have server-side encryption and you have client-side encryption. Now, client-side encryption basically means is that you encrypt the file locally on your system using various different encryption algorithms. It could be AES 256 or anything that you guys like. And then you send that file over the network to what we say AWS. And when AWS stores that file in S3, it is already encrypted. The other option that you have is called server-side encryption, wherein AWS handles the encryption for you. So you send your file, and your file is encrypted, of course, through SSL TLS when it's in transit. But AWS receives an unencrypted version of your file, and when it receives that unencrypted version, it basically encrypts it and then it stores it in the S3 bucket. So let's move on. We're going to talk about encryption at rest in AWS. So AWS basically gives you three different ways on how you can control the encryption that takes place. The first way is SSE S3. Now, SSE basically stands for server side encryption, and S3 is basically the S3 bucket. So what this is basically S3 managed keys using AES 256-bit encryption. So if you choose the option SSE S3, basically the encryption keys are managed by S3, and basically it uses AES 256-bit encryption to encrypt your buckets. Now, to tell you guys, every single object that is uploaded into an S3 bucket is encrypted by default. Every single object that you upload in an S3 bucket is encrypted by default, and this is the default option that is chosen, that is SSE S3. Now, coming on to the second option that we have over here is SSE KMS, where KMS stands for Key Management Service. So AWS has another service that is called AWS KMS. Basically, this manages the keys for you. And so if you guys, for example, say that you don't want S3 to manage the keys for you, then you can move over to the another service that is called KMS, wherein KMS will manage the keys for you. And finally, we have the third option, that is SSEC, which basically means that the customer provides the keys. So the customer is responsible, or we can say the end user is responsible to create the keys, manage the keys, and provide those keys to AWS. So in the scenario, so now what's the disadvantage of SSE is basically if you have a key rotation policy set, you have to maintain that key rotation policy by yourself. S3 is a completely automated process. It is seamless. You don't need to care about anything. If you go to SSE KMS, you'll have to set a few IAM roles, IAM policies. You'll have to work into how do you want the key rotation to be and all of that. And when it comes to SSE customer, you're responsible completely related to the keys. So this is basically the three different options that AWS does provide you for encryption at rest in the S3 bucket. So now let's head right to the S3 console so I can show you guys where is this setting available and how can you enable it or disable it. So let's head right over. Okay guys, so we're back here at the S3 console. So we're gonna go ahead and create a new bucket. So in this new bucket, we're gonna basically say, I'm gonna leave everything as default as usual. I'm just gonna say encrypt YouTube video. Okay. And now when you scroll down, I'm gonna leave everything as default, but when you scroll all the way down, you will see an option that says default encryption. Now, I told you guys that server-side encryption is automatically applied to new objects stored in S3. So no matter what option you choose over here, the SSE S3 is going to be the default option that is going to be enabled. Now, for example, if you do not choose any option over here, like we're going to leave this as default. So I'm going to show you guys how can you change or modify these options once the bucket is created. But again, no matter what object you upload to any S3 bucket, it will be encrypted by default. Let's go ahead and click create. Okay, there we go. Our bucket has been created. Let's go to encrypt YouTube video. And now we're going to head back to the properties tab. We're going to scroll down. You can see we have a tab or a section over here that says default encryption. And the current encryption type is SSE S3, wherein S3 manages the keys. So we're going to go ahead and click on edit. And when we click on edit, you will see the various different options available like SSE KMS and DSSE KMS. So for example, if we want to change from an S3 manage to a KMS manage, so then what we basically need to do is we have to provide the AWS KMS key ARN over here. ARN again stands for Amazon resource name. Now in the scenario that if you guys do not have a KMS key setup, you can of course go ahead and create one. If you already have a KMS key, then you can go ahead and input the ARN over here and AWS will automatically pull that in. So again, I have not dived into how to create a KMS key and all of that, so I'm not going to show that to you guys. We'll dive into KMS keys in a future video, but this is basically how you can encrypt objects in an S3 bucket using multiple different avenues and different options that's there. In today's video, we're going to be talking about S3 replication. So let's dive right into the video. So what is replication? Replication is basically where you can replicate objects from one bucket to another. For example, if you have an object in bucket A and you want that object to also be in bucket B, you can create a replication rule where whenever that object is uploaded to bucket A, it automatically gets replicated to another bucket. A few important points to remember for replication is that versioning must be enabled on both the source and destination buckets. So in the replication, as I told you, bucket A, bucket B, you will basically be having two different buckets. One is called your source bucket, one is called your destination bucket, and both of the buckets should have versioning enabled. Another point to remember is existing objects are not replicated automatically. So by default, replication is not enabled in whenever you create an S3 bucket. So for example, if you upload 10 objects before you create a replication rule, those 10 objects will not be automatically replicated to the new bucket. And finally, if any object is marked for deletion, they will not be replicated by default. You can set up special rules or special stuff to get those deleted objects replicated, and also you can set up special rules and processes to get existing objects replicated. So let's dive right into the S3 console so I can show you guys how does replication work in action. Okay, guys, so we're here in our S3 console. So what we're basically going to do is we are going to create two buckets. So I'm going to give my first bucket name as um, YouTube source bucket. This is going to be our source bucket wherein we will put the objects inside this bucket. And when we scroll down, we are going to enable bucket versioning. As I told you guys, both the source and destination bucket should have versioning enabled. And we're going to leave everything as default, and we're going to go ahead and click create bucket. There we go. We have a bucket called YouTube source bucket. Let's create another bucket called YouTube destination bucket. Awesome. And then again, we're going to scroll down and we are going to enable bucket versioning and we will create bucket. Now we are getting some, okay, it says that this bucket name already exists. So let's just append some numbers to it and we're going to go ahead and click on create bucket. Awesome. Now we have two buckets created. One is YouTube source bucket and one is YouTube destination bucket. So the replication rule that we will be applying will be applied onto the source bucket. So what I'm going to do is I am going to open the source bucket. We're going to head over to the management tab, and under the management tab, you'll see a section called replication rules. Here is where we are going to create our rules. So let's click on create replication rule. We're going to give some rule name. Let's say test replication rule. Awesome. You want to choose whether this rule is enabled or disabled when created. I'm going to say that this is going to be enabled. And now these are the settings for our source bucket. So basically, this is our source bucket name, YouTube source bucket, our region. Choose a rule scope. Do you want to apply it to using one or more filters, or you want to apply to all objects in the bucket? I'm going to apply this to all objects in the bucket. And then we're going to say our destination. Now we can choose a bucket in this account or we can specify an S3 bucket in a different account. Of course, as I have created that bucket here, I'm just going to click on browse S3. It will show me all the buckets that I have available. I'm just going to go ahead and choose YouTube destination bucket 2356, choose path. It says awesome, well and good. Now you require an IAM role basically for replicating objects from one S3 bucket to another S3 bucket. Again, we do not have any existing IAM role for this use case, so I'm just going to simply click on create new role. AWS will manage everything from creating the role to assigning the role and getting that done. We are going to say no, we don't have any encryption requirements right now. We do not want to change the storage class of the replicated um, what we say objects. And then we have a few additional replication objects that wherein you want to have a replication time control, um, or you want to have a replication metrics, delete marker replication, or replication modification sync. Again, we don't want to touch any of these replication options right now because we are just creating a very basic replication rule. So we're going to go ahead and click on save. Hopefully everything is correct, and there you go. Now when you do click on save, you will get this one-time option which is called a batch operation job. Here it will ask you whether you want to run a one-time operation wherein if there are any existing objects in your bucket, do you want them to be replicated? Again, this will cost you, so be careful when you do apply this one-time batch operation. Of course, the cost all depends on the amount of objects you have in your bucket. But again, I do not have any objects in my bucket, so I will say no, do not replicate existing objects, and we're going to click on submit. And there you go. Our replication rule has been set up. You can see the status is enabled and all of the settings that we had set. Now let's head back to our source bucket. Now what we're going to do is I am going to so we can come to our destination bucket and we can see right now we don't have any object in our destination bucket and we don't have any object in our source bucket. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I will upload a file over here. So I am just going to drag some random file that I have right here. So you can see I dragged a file that's called index.html. This is the file that I used in our S3 static website video. So I'm going to go ahead and click on upload. If everything goes well, this object should have been uploaded successfully, and we're going to click on close. Now we can see that we have one object over here. Now let's head to our destination bucket and let's click refresh. Now we clicked refresh and you can see that we don't have any object populating over here. And now the reason behind that is your objects are not replicated in real time. It takes some time for the objects to be replicated. So let's click refresh again, and there you go. Your object has now been replicated. And there you go. You can see we had uploaded an object that is called index.html, and after applying the replication rule, that object has come over here. Now, again, just to give you guys some better insight, this replication can happen in a few seconds, in a few minutes, and so on. It's not going to happen in real time. That is, if you upload it right now, in the next second, it will not be available in your destination S3 bucket. It could take a couple of seconds or even a couple of minutes. So do wait, and you keep refreshing, and finally you can see that we have an object that has been replicated over here. So that's basically how you set up replication in S3. How can you replicate objects, and how can you also replicate existing objects currently in your S3 bucket. In today's video, we're going to be discussing about how can you optimize performance in S3. So let's dive right into the video. So we have something that is called S3 prefixes. So I'm sure you guys know that S3 bucket operates just like any other folder or directory, wherein you can create multiple folders inside folders and you or multiple directories. Now, for example, what is a prefix? This folder or this directory is basically called a prefix. So let's take, we have a bucket. So this is our main bucket, the S3 bucket. Inside our S3 bucket, we created a folder called my folder. And inside that folder, we are storing an object that is called picture.img. Now, picture.img is basically our object, and my folder is the name of the folder or the directory, or we can call my folder as the prefix. So, any folder or directory that you create is basically called a prefix in S3. You can create multiple prefixes. For example, I can create my folder, then I can create another folder under my folder, which is basically, let's take it as new folder. And after that, in that specified folder or directory, I can store my object that is called picture.png. So you can see we have two folders over here. One is my folder, and then we have a new folder. So my folder would be a prefix, and new folder would also be a prefix. So that is basically what prefixes are in S3. Now let's talk about S3 performance. Now I wanted you guys to understand what is a prefix, because everything is quite related to prefix when it comes to S3 performance. So you can have 3,500 put or copy or post or delete requests per prefix. Okay, so 3,500 is a huge number. So you can have any of these requests, 3,500 of these requests per second per prefix. Now let's look at the get slash head. In get slash head, you can make 5,500 get or head requests per prefix per second. So which basically means more the prefixes, more better performance that you are going to have. For example, if we have two prefixes, the result is that we can achieve speeds of 11,000 get requests per second. And now what is an example of having two prefix is basically my folder 1 is your first prefix, my folder 2 is your prefix number 2, and then your object that is stored, which basically means now instead of having a normal 5,500 request per second, now we can achieve 11,000 get requests per second. So that's a double value. So imagine if we have four prefixes over here, we can basically achieve a speed of 22,000 get requests or head requests per uh, second. So look at how the performance has increased when we keep adding prefixes. Now let's move on. Now, of course, with this high level of speed or performance, we do have limitations, and that limitations comes with the security standpoint. That is, we have limitations with our KMS, that is our key management service. Now, again, if you are using the SSE S3, which is basically the S3 managed keys, you will not be facing any limits at all. You don't need to worry. But if you are using the KMS service that AWS does provide, then you will be having some limits. So if you are using SSE KMS, you must keep within the specified limit. Now, when we talk about these limits are actually specific to each region. So each region will have their own specific limit. Again, if you guys are working for US East 1 or any US West 1 or maybe down in Australia, you guys can Google up or look at the Amazon documentation on what the limit is. But in general, the limits can either be 5,500, 10,000, or 30,000 requests per second. So now let's take an example. Now I told you guys in the previous example, the more the prefixes that you have, the better performance that you have. So now let's take, we have four prefixes, okay? We have four prefixes, which basically means we can achieve a speed of 22,000 get requests per second. Now let's take, we have deployed our object in US East 1. Now let's take US East 1 has a limit of 10,000 calls to SSE KMS per second. So basically, even though we have four prefixes that allow us to get 22,000, that allow us to make 22,000 requests per second, this will again be limited by KMS because KMS only allows a max of 10,000 requests per second. Now, moving on, we're going to be talking about multi-part uploads. Now, whatever we spoke right now is basically fetching objects from S3. Now, let's talk about multi-part upload. So, multi-part upload basically means uploading an object in multiple different parts. Now, this is recommended for files that are over 100 GB, wherein you do parallel uploads, which basically increases efficiency for you. Now, what do we mean by multi-part upload or parallel upload? Basically, your 100 GB file will be broken down into chunks for a faster upload. So now we may break down this 100 GB file into 5 chunks of 20 GB each, or we may break this down into even more chunks, that is maybe 10 chunks. If we break it down into 10 chunks, that would be 10 GB each. Now uploading a file or a part of a file worth 10 GB is way faster than uploading a whole 100 GB file. So that is basically the concept of multi-part uploads. And another good thing about multi-part uploads is that if a specific a part, like for example, we are splitting into 5 parts. Now part 1 has been uploaded successfully, part 2 has been uploaded successfully. Now there's some issue with part 3. Then what's going to happen is we are only going to retry part 3 and we do not need to re-upload the whole file. So you see, that saves us time. We only need to re-upload part 2, which is just a 20 GB part instead of the whole 100 GB. So that's another good advantage of multi-part uploads. Now coming on, we have something that is called S3 byte range fetch. This basically is where you can do parallel downloads by specifying byte ranges. So you can specify specific byte ranges wherein those byte ranges are downloaded. Now, if a download is failed, it only fails for that specific byte range and you only need to retry that specific byte range, and again, not the whole range altogether. This can basically be used to speed up downloads and it increases efficiency. So that's about it for how you guys can optimize performance in an S3 bucket. So I hope you guys did like this video. If you did, please make sure to leave a like, do subscribe, do comment if there are any other topics that you guys would like me to cover. I hope you guys have a great day ahead. See ya. Take care. Bye bye.